This is Biodiversity 1 of 2, and we're going to talk about what biodiversity is. So our standard is 5.2, identify several reasons for the importance of maintaining the Earth's biodiversity. Okay, the first word we need to define then is biodiversity. You need to know that bio means life, diversity means variety. So when we put these two words together, like we see in biodiversity, we can get a definition. The definition for biodiversity is all the variety of life within an ecosystem, biome, or the entire Earth. So when we talk about the biodiversity, we're talking about that variety of life that's within an ecosystem. Okay, now when we do this, biodiversity actually encompasses three things. So let's define what these three things are, okay? The first thing, when we talk about biodiversity, we're really talking about a number. And what I mean by number is we're talking about the total number of species, okay? And we are talking about both plant and animal species, all right? So when we talk about biodiversity, one thing that we're considering is the total number of species within an area, okay? All right, the next type of, and you can see that here with this picture. The next type of biodiversity that's included when we talk is talking about genetic biodiversity, okay? And genetic biodiversity is when you have a variation if I can spell, give me a second, sorry, variation in genes within a species. So you can see here at the picture that we got, there was a mutation, which means one of the base pairs paired with the different like adenine, guanine, thymine, cytosine, it paired incorrectly, because if you remember, A always pairs with T, G always pairs from C from last year. So you have a mutation. Anytime you have a mutation, that means that you create a different protein, okay? So what you will end up with is genetic variation within the same species. So to make that applicable to life, an example would be dogs. And what I mean by dogs is there's different breeds of dogs. You can have Chihuahuas, you can have Great Danes. Now, they are very, very different. They're all the same species, but yet there's a huge variation among them, okay? Now, right here, what I want you to do is list your favorite dog breed and tell me why that's your favorite dog breed. Like, for example, and don't use mine unless it truly is yours, but one of my favorite dog breeds is a poodle, and that's because they're hypoallergenic and they're good for people with allergies, and my husband has really bad allergies. So here I would have wrote poodle, and I would have said because they're hypoallergenic, they don't shed, that kind of thing. They're good for people with allergies. Okay. The third thing that encompasses when we talk about biodiversity is actually an ecosystem. Okay. Now, I put a picture of biomes here so that I could further explain what I'm talking about when I'm talking about ecosystem biodiversity. Okay, so it's when you have different habitats having different combinations of species. And I'll make this have so it reads correctly. Okay, so different habitats have a different combination of species. And if I look here, okay, all this right here, where we live about, make sure I get it right. We might be a little more east than that. Okay, but right here in this general area, okay, that I made the red dots that you can see. All of this, and I'm kind of just doing a rough outline of it, okay? If you look down here in the key, you can tell that this is a deciduous forest. All right, now, just be aware that as you go next to the Great Lakes up here, okay, in the deciduous forest, you're going to have, it's going to be a different habitat, even though it is a deciduous forest, and you're going to have different combinations of species, and that's due to having different temperatures, and the amount of rainfall, okay? So even when we're talking about diversity, we can talk about that different combination that you are going to see within a different ecosystem or biome, just because of the temperature differences and the different combinations of, even though they're similar habitats, they can be different. So we talk about ecosystem biodiversity, and it's important that we have the different biomes that we have discussed and talked about. Okay, so let's talk about why biodiversity is important, okay? One of the main reasons, and you can bullet this, right, I haven't, but I will right quick. All right, we'll do filled circles, is that the greater diversity ensures natural sustainability for all life forms. Okay, now that's kind of a wordy definition, but what it's saying is without this great amount of diversity, that means that the amount of life that is here can't be sustained. Okay, so the more biodiversity that we have, with different species, different ecosystems, different genetic variation, the greater that is, the greater probability we have to be able to sustain or be able to carry that much life here on Earth. Okay, another one is food. Go back, put my bullet. All right. Biodiversity is important because it allows us to have a variety of different foods. So right here, what I want you to do is I want you to list what your favorite food is. Right. You may not realize this, but medicines that you take, many of them are derived from different plants that they found, done research on, and found that it had some medicinal property. Okay, so medicines, also water, okay, water health, that kind of thing, energy, all right. And also even providing us wood to, let's say, build with. So biodiversity is important because once you start taking out, let's say, plant life, then you're going to have an impact on maybe future medicines or vaccines that they can come up with. When biodiversity decreases, then water health, believe it or not, because there's natural organisms and things that are in a water or a body of water that actually regulate that water's health, the ability to produce energy and also wood. So on the next slide, what I showed you here is this, and you can't necessarily reach, but you can get the idea here. And let me get some pen here so you can see what I'm talking about. So the sunlight, of course, would be what would give us energy to make the tree grow, right? Well, then the trees give off the oxygen, which is good for this bat here, okay? Because the bat takes in oxygen and gives off what? Carbon dioxide, okay? But as we continue, if I was to follow everything on this web, what you're going to see is all these different plant life and different organism life, plant and animal, they're interconnected. Okay, so that's something that we need to make sure that we understand. Why biodiversity is important is because of the biodiversity web. Okay, and like I said, and that's that everything within an area is interconnected. Now, and this would include, for example, this would include food webs, and yes, you need to write this down, water health, okay, oxygen and carbon dioxide cycle, which we learned that last year. But if you throw any one of these things off that become depleted or destroyed, or if you have an animal species that becomes extinct or dies off, it's going to affect this entire web. So it's going to be like a cause and effect. They're going to have negative impacts throughout the whole thing. Okay? All right, last but not least, one last thing it does is it measures the health of a habitat. So if I go to a body of water and I notice that there's a very limited amount of species, let's say the Nolichucky, and all of a sudden they were this species of frogs that are no longer there, that right there is helping me measure the health of that habitat or that body of water. So the greater the amount of biodiversity usually is a good indicator of a habitat's health. And if you start seeing different species die off, you know that there's something else going on happening that's not beneficial to that environment or that habitat. Okay, guys, this is biodiversity 1 of 2. What is biodiversity?